Welcome back to My BrainWise Coach. I'm Cole Bastian.
And I'm Phil.
And we are so excited that you have joined us for another episode as we go along this journey of understanding ourselves better from a neuroscience and behavioral science perspective. And if you are enjoying this conversation and you're getting something out of it, give us a 5-star rating and review on wherever it is that you're getting your podcasts, whether it's Spotify or it's Apple or wherever it might be, as well as subscribe, like, comment, and share our podcast on any of the social media platforms that you're following us on, because it certainly does help us grow this continuing to grow BrainWise community. And we've got a really exciting conversation for you today. And we're going to spend a little bit of time on this discussion that we typically don't spend enough time on, which is closure. And so we've got a really amazing guest who is going to help us understand this from her own experiences, as well as from a theoretical and practical perspective. And I'm not going to try, Pepper, to introduce your really great experience and overall background and expertise in the areas. So, Pepper, if you would please introduce yourself to our BrainWise friends.
Thank you, Cole. I really appreciate it. And it's just a real treat to get to play in this sandbox with you and Phil. But my background includes over 30 years in medical research, drug development, coaching, social sciences, and that ilk, right? Humanity in general. I've worked across a lot of the heavy duty therapeutic areas like neurology, infectious diseases, oncology, even had the pleasure of working in the early days of infertility treatments. And over the last decade or so, I've specialized in the area of the diseases of aging. It's relevant to where I am in the arc of my lifetime, and it's certainly a fascinating space because it's multifocal. What has really been the most interesting part of my career so far was I was asked about a decade ago to start a new drug company, and against my better judgment, because I really wanted to go into coaching full time, I agreed to be a founder and lead and fundraise a company that was focused on the diseases of aging, developing novel candidates for that space. That taught me a lot, including a lot of humility, some cynicism, and certainly a lot about who I am or who I want to be as a leader. And that culminated in a variety of big, gnarly decisions that have led me to the moment of now. And we're certainly going to get deeper into that. But at this point in my life, I spend a lot of time coaching senior operators, mentoring emerging leaders, advising startup companies on strategy, entrepreneurship, and truly functional, healthy, sustainable leadership, and just being generally of service to the community in which I live, because that gives me such joy. And it helps to understand sort of what makes me tick. My core values include curiosity, human growth and development, as well as nature. I'm a very much an outdoor cat.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. And I know that you and Phil have known each other much longer than obviously you and I have had the opportunity to know each other. So Phil, I don't know if you want to share a little bit about, how you first met Pepper and, kind of your overall experience and why we're asking her to participate in our show today, because we've got some really exciting discussions to have.
So I met Pepper, I think it was about probably 7 years ago when Kathy, my wife, and I moved to Oxford. We met Pepper fairly early on. I think the first time I met her, she was dressed in boots and jodhpurs, and I'd just come in from a writing session. But I have to say that Pepper, I've been blessed with many wonderful people in my life, one of whom is Pepper. She's one of the smartest and most erudite people on the planet that I know. So I think we're in for a great discussion today. She has lots of thoughtful contributions to make to the neuroscience world. And so I look forward to hearing more of her wisdom.
Absolutely. And as I had shared earlier, we're here to talk about something that we typically don't probably spend a lot of time on, which is around the kind of the idea of closure and the act of closure, and not the kind that comes, neatly wrapped with answers, but the kind that shows up when something ends, maybe before we're ready, or maybe we know it's coming, but it's still, something that's difficult, whether it's a job, a role, relationship, a chapter of who we thought we were. And we know it takes courage in order to go through this process, along with a variety of other things. And so we're going to kind of call this discussion today the courage to close. And so, we're going to kind of pepper you with pepper, or let me say that. We're going to throw a bunch of questions at you today, Pepper, if you don't mind taking us through your experience and sharing it with our BrainWise friends, what you're willing to share. And I think, Phil, you've got the first question for her.
I do. And that is, we use the word closure, and that can be applied to business relationships, personal, all those things that Cole just sold. Why is it so challenging?
Well, closure comes in a variety of flavors, as we all know all too well. Sometimes it comes as a surprise and there's an abrupt termination, and then you're left with a mess and you pick up the pieces, right? But it's definitive, right? And it gets handed to you as opposed to choosing it. Um, there are a lot of things in life, business and otherwise, where realizing that to stay on the track you're on is a slow death, right? And that's rarely desirable either. So the idea of bringing something to a close or ending something with a degree of dignity and grace, and even being proactive about it, gives our brain what it craves the most, which is certainty. Because you get, or at least I did, I got to a place in my career leading this company where it really became, it was me surviving or the company perhaps surviving, no guarantee in the recent funding environment and climate. And I chose me, but that took a lot of time and a lot of, to be honest, courage to say it's okay to step away from this. It's okay to fail, right? Without judgment and burden in that word. It's okay to say this wasn't meant to be. And I think a lot of us, whether it's a divorce or ending some other kind of really substantial relationship, to actively choose to close something so that there is a possibility of a better life around the corner, that's no small thing to do. And that's what I lived.
And I think we know, and you mentioned it.
Great. Phil, before we go forward, one of the things I'm getting on this new platform is a lot of feedback. So when the other person isn't talking, can we turn our mute button on and then unmute when we go to talk? Because like when Pepper was speaking, there were several places of interference. So let's practice really quick where the mute button is before we continue. I think it'll be really helpful when it comes to them being able to hear us clearly.
Sure.
Do you want to practice?
Do we all see it yeah, we know how to turn it back on and it works.
Got it.
Phil, perfect. All right, let's do that. So Phil, you can't hear us now?
I can.
Oh, you can. You were shaking your head. All right. So jump back in, Phil, with your commentary to Pepper's amazing answer.
Well, what I would say is, yes, it was an amazing answer. And as you mentioned, the brain loves certainty. And if the process is a long, slow death, as you mentioned it, there's nothing certain about it. So we love to get some level of certainty, even though it might not be what we desired, but the certainty overpowers that in the brain.
Absolutely. And you know the concept probably even better than I do because of your background in tech and certainly really interesting moments in the history of tech and evolution. But failing forward as an idea, when you live it, you recognize it. Oh, that's what that means. But until you live it, it's just this abstract idea. And closure is step one of being able to fail forward. And I'm just putting that together kind of in my lived experience and in language. But like so many things in life, until you've done it, like bearing children, raising children, you really just don't fully appreciate it.
No, you don't. It's difficult to appreciate something that you certainly haven't gone through, yourself. And I think, Pepper, with that said, you told a little bit about your story and kind of, why this came up as we were having the discussion. But I'm curious, what you might be willing to share in terms of, the closure experience that you went through that prompted this discussion. Can you share a little bit of insight and detail, with what you're willing to share around it to give people some context?
Sure. Um, so there were the practical realities of of starting a company shortly before COVID hit and then trying to fundraise and grow it in that very weird landscape of remoteness, literally and figuratively. Um, and being a social creature, that was a real challenge, right? Because I really enjoy in-person dynamics. And when it comes to fundraising, especially as an early stage company, people are putting their trust in you because the science is so untested. So that was a challenge. But we were very fortunate in the early days to get funded by not one, but three different institutes at the NIH to do some of the very early translational science with our candidates. So those were great wins in the early days, and they built momentum. And then COVID came and did what COVID did, and there was an awful lot of new money, if you will, that came into the space. And then the bubble burst. And then the trust of science really got eroded, and that's quite sad in many ways. But again, it's part of the arc of humanity to question things. And so again, the pattern plays out. But taking it forward, we hunted for the right first indication, right? The first clinical application of our science. We really went through a variety of, we could take it here, we could take it there. And that's normal for any new pharma company, new biotech company. But where we landed was on Alzheimer's ultimately. And that was possibly one of the fatal mistakes, which is it's a mismatch of resources to be a startup company taking on one of the gnarliest diseases in human history, right? Dementia. That's like boiling the ocean. It's a goofy phrase, but everybody gets it. While we had great supporting science to say we could have an impact on brain health, which is near and dear to my heart. My mother has it. She's in a home in Maryland in the really ugly phase of Alzheimer's now. But ultimately, I really wanted to bring this to society. And in my naivete and in my ego driven existence in that moment, I'm like, I can do this. But pretty much everything else around me said, you might want to rethink that because it's going to be nearly impossible. But because I am a fighter, I am certainly scrappy. I kept driving us forward. We kept getting micro traction. We had a lot of good conversations with big pharma, VC, et cetera. But ultimately, the funding environment and the cost of time finally proved our demise. And so when I looked at the runway and what I could pretty much experience for another year or two, I said, it's better to call it proactively, with dignity, with courage, with grace, communicate this to all the parties, all the stakeholders, and say, look, we've given it everything. We we are out of money. It's time to stop. Here's what I suggest we do. And then I did exactly what I suggested we do. And my investors actually thanked me. And of course, the guilt and even the shame of failing, quote unquote, because this was the first time I'd ever founded a drug company. And I had this, well, I mean, I love the phrase, I had quite a shame storm that lasted for quite a long time. And yet, like grief, it's multifocal. You have all these emotions. And the only way to be through it is to go through it. And so I was grateful for the people who said, you have something to teach. Even as awful as this feels now, the way you did it, the way you were appreciated for doing it, right? Your funders, your stakeholders, your science, even the IP firm or lawyers, we owed them tons of money. He still talks to me and they never got paid, right? So I hope in all of that, because this is actually quite common. And now that I have a bit of distance, I know most companies do fail, pharma or otherwise. And we get to choose how we show up as leaders and participants to these stories, such that when they fail, not if, but when, we still say, gosh, that was an amazing, if really rough experience. And here's what I can take forward. here's what I can teach to others who might want to do this. They can learn from my mistakes. They'll make their own. That's okay. But now with this clean slate, with all this experience and wisdom and network and what have you, whatever I do next will be so much more powered because I was able to say, it's time to be done, and made it.
So I have a couple of questions for you, Pepper. And it would take, so I'm going to give you two, and you choose which one you want to address first. The first one is you made reference to it's like grief. It has phases. Do you have a number of those phases that you can talk about and define for us? So that's the first one. The second thing is, I'm from England originally, and failing in England has a very different experience than failing in the US. Have you thought about how failure in different cultures can be impacted?
Gosh, I never have, but let me, because I think it serves the audience and it certainly serves the folks I coach and mentor. The phases of failure grief. I think at first you have a huge serving of shame and guilt, right? Especially as an entrepreneur. You feel like you've let people down. You feel in some ways, I went through the phase of, I feel like I let science down because we had these incredibly promising candidates. But the length and the cost to bring an Alzheimer's drug to a place where it could even be considered for approval is about like putting somebody on the moon, right? It's epic. Um, and we don't have a lot to show for it yet. So there was a bit of hubris, and I had to just work through that as perhaps if I'd had it to do over with what I know now, I would not have started with Alzheimer's as our first indication in neurodegenerative diseases. That's on me, and I can own that as a strategy and tactic decision that perhaps I could have done differently, right? And I forgive myself for believing in something important and trying to solve for it. So grief, guilt, or sorry, shame, guilt, moving to forgiveness, and then processing just the nervous system answer to all of this, which is burnout. Oh my God, was there burnout? Because you're still trying to push a rock uphill. So you have to first get over the really obvious emotions that sort of engulf you. And then once they have reached kind of a quieter drip of water as opposed to the storm, then you're like, well, if I'm not that, what am I? What could I become? And the thought of having a thing take over your life, because entrepreneurship will do that, right? It really does become everything you think about. It wakes you up at night, all the things. It's just all encompassing. And some of that is normal. And some of that can be exacerbated by the fear, imposter syndrome, fear of failure, all these things. And so again, the amygdala, whether we like it or not, is often driving the bus. So moving through this forgiveness stage, this who am this identity question, I'm not a CEO anymore. I'm not important anymore. And then as you sort of work through that, it's, oh God, I'm not important anymore. Yay. I could just be as opposed to do. So then you literally unwind sort of that mindset, and your nervous system finally starts to go, right? And thankfully, my understanding as a coach and my training and background as a coach has allowed me to be like, this is important. It must be experienced if I ever want to let it go and process it through me and out, right? Versus holding on and sticking it on a shelf somewhere in the back of my mind to just tick away like a bomb, which happens with traumatic experiences. You know this, you teach this. But in terms of jumping forward to your second question of the concept of failure, I think in American culture, we're still the Wild West cowboy sort of phenotype and right now that's pretty evident, more so than ever. Um, and failure is just part of it, right? But I wonder, and this is just a working hypothesis, little h, women are new to the cliff of entrepreneurship and really putting themselves out there, at least my generation. I think the ones behind me are a little braver, a little different. They're wired differently, they were raised differently, different resources, different mindsets, different attitudes. But when we fail, we feel like we've let down the sisterhood, and especially when you think about the statistics of who gets funding, it still is not us, right? It's still not women. It's not people of color. So there's this, oh God, not only do we let the immediate, ecosystem down, we let other women down. So failure in the United States, I think, is a little more charged energetically, whereas failing in other places, because the culture has taught you that failure is part of the journey, it's not optional. It is baked in. And they might have a better mindset that skips some of these grief related pathology, right? That sit us down on the bench and let us, have our little pity party with balloons and everything else and cupcakes for a while. We could skip that. That would be nice. But that's going to take some cultural shifts and some story revisions about what it means.
I thank you for sharing. I truly think it's a powerful description of kind of your experience and ultimately experiences I'm sure others have had. And one of the things that I heard a little bit is a theme in there, and these are certainly my words, not yours, but is, that this concept of failure or experiencing failure can sometimes lead to self-blame, and self-blame gives us the illusion of control in a lot of senses. And I think it's hard for people, and you mentioned this, which is, how do you then move to self-forgiveness? Because oftentimes people, I think, maybe it's in the non-conscious part of our brain. It's like we're pretending that it didn't matter if we forgive ourselves. And so we hold on to it, trying to, make it mean something. But self-forgiveness isn't that. It's not saying that it doesn't matter. It's refusing to carry the weight forever so that you are able to then be able to move forward. And so I really appreciate what you just shared. And I have another question that I think is interesting and related to that particular topic, which is, what role does context play in how we process endings? And then maybe how can leaders provide context for their teams during organizational change or closure?
Yeah, that's a truly powerful and useful question, and I appreciate it, Cole. One of the things that really helps us process failure with a little f, or tough experiences that we often conclude we're the only one having that. We're the only one who did that and had that consequence, right? That it's about us. Whereas when you have context, especially social context, that, oh no, 95% of companies pretty much fail within the first 5 years and for all these reasons, right? Oh, so I'm in a really awesome group. It's a large group of folk who have tried brave things and still failed, right? Smarter people than me. So contextualizing that you're not alone is a huge piece of helping, especially emerging leaders, appreciate that happens. And what you do with it is what really makes or breaks your next phase of leadership growth, right? Personal and leadership growth. So there's that. But the self-forgiveness, again, I look back and all this thing that talks about the self is part of the challenge, which is when we make it about us, especially when we lead something like an Alzheimer's therapeutic company, that was always about everybody else. And when I lost sight of that occasionally, which I did, I put so much more unnecessary pressure on myself as opposed to saying, I serve the mission. This is something that the military, the US military and other militaries around the world have done a beautiful job of creating culture, right? And really just down into the DNA level, which is We are a team. We serve the mission. And it allows us to get out of our ego, get out of ourselves, and be part of things that are much greater than ourselves, of course, right? It takes teams to do big things always. And when we recognize that and we practice that, it puts that buffer of comfort, and we're not alone in lifting this heavy burden. And so that's what I often encourage folks to think about who were playing and dabbling in entrepreneurship, which is, what is your mission? Be clear on it. When you ask other people to join your team, be clear that they buy into that stated mission and that it's a worthy mission, right? And that gives us more objectivity, which gives us more grace, right? And even better optics to see the options. And so moving from a subjective state of, I have to do this, to an objective state of, we could do this. Totally different energy. And that was a huge takeaway from that journey for me.
So I have, based on that, so I'm just going to sort of try and step back a little bit and summarize what I heard you basically talk about 5 phases, which has happened before. You talked about the shame and the guilt. You talked about recognizing hubris. You talked about forgiveness, and then the identity, who am I? And then what I call the celebration of relief. How does that ring for you?
I think those are all the things you have to clear out, right? That's the clearing of the space, much in the way a lot of ritual will have you burn symbolic things in a fire pit to, again, to release these things. I guess that's the better verb, because release is part of moving through an experience towards letting it go. And when you let it go, then you have this beautiful, blank, but more educated, wiser space from which to grow something. I'm getting ready to plant my new garden for the year, and I'm excited about it. And much as a reflection of and I just put this together as what I did, last year with closing the company, I pretty much took all the infrastructure and took it down to the bones. Because I was like, I've learned a lot. I want to start over. Let's start with a blank slate. And even though it looks like chaos and big piles of dirt in my front yard or, on the farm here, I can still in my mind, I'm like, oh, that's going to be a better way to do that. And this is going to be gorgeous in a couple of years, but I know where to start. Right. And so you get excited and engaged again when you've done the thing that clears the space, whatever that takes, whatever feelings you have to allow through you. But it's very much an honest and messy process. But I think what you just tallied was, yeah, the first half of the process that involved clearing the space.
And if you had it to do all over again, and what are the 3 things that you do differently this time around?
Oh heavens. I'm being really honest. I might have never done it in the first place. And the reason being is I felt such a call to leave biotech behind after nearly 3 decades or whatever it was, 2.5, and go be a coach. I wanted to serve people in a different way, a more social sciences, less medical sciences way. And I was on a roll. I was building momentum. I was embracing a lot of things that I had been fearful of, like social media. But somebody who was a huge part of my professional career development, my mentor, wanted me to do this. And he worked on me for months, and I finally caved and said, okay, I'll do it because I know you're going to be here with me. And the very first thing that happened when I said yes was he died unexpectedly. And at that point, because I had said yes, I felt obligated to go forward, even though nobody would have held me to it. But once I decide something, I can be a bit stubborn. So that's the true honesty of, I had to accept and tell myself and forgive myself for, when you follow somebody else's dream that becomes your dream because it speaks to your ego, things may not go well. So that's some honesty and some vulnerability there. But knowing that I did what I did, I think trusting the people I had asked for advice a bit more versus being more stubborn than perhaps was needed to go in a direction that would have made the lift easier and to get a point on the board possibly sooner instead of saying, this needs to be solved, we're going to go there, rather than being more strategic. So it was a tactical error, I suspect. That's another thing I look back and say, lesson learned, right? It was a mismatch of resources, perhaps. And I think the other thing is certainly more internal, which is there were moments where it would have been okay to shut it down sooner for very natural business events. But I kept being convinced by a handful of people, I'll leave them out of this, to keep going when my whole nervous system said, oh God, you could be done with this now. Whew, that would be lovely. And just as quickly, I'm like, well, I guess I owe it to keep going. I owe it to so and so or so such and such to keep going. And oh my God, I didn't. I really didn't owe anybody anything. And that was an incredibly valuable lesson. But hard things are hard things for a reason. So we all make choices. And I suspect if I could offer a takeaway is if you are choosing to do the hard thing, try to make sure it's not your ego driving. It's something else.
I actually think that is a very, very powerful statement because a lot of how you described it was letting ego override what your internal, natural, I'll call it intuition, whatever word you want to apply. It was like the two of them were fighting with each other.
They really were. And I remember moments where I could feel the internal tension and chose to ignore it. Consciously chose to say, that's okay. You rationalize things that you just don't want to face. And I definitely did some of that.
And if you look at what we know about the conscious and non-conscious brains, our non-conscious brain is often giving us messages, and quite often they're in symbols or feelings rather than words. And yet our conscious brain, especially if it's driven by the left hemisphere, will actually turn around and sort of close down those feelings and little internal messages coming from the right hemisphere.
Yeah. Knowing, certainly the work you've done in the last many years, your writings, your teachings, just even your guidance to me over the years, this idea of our nervous system perhaps being smarter than our executive function can be sometimes. Like I'm fascinated with HRV as a messenger system and being able to measure HRV as a metric for, are you operating in alignment, right, with yourself, your core values, who you want to be, not what you're doing, but truly who you want to be. And I continue to study that to see if there are messages that our frontal lobe can read and say, that's our nervous system trying to tell us something. Perhaps we should pay attention.
So I couldn't agree more. I think there is a lot more research to be done. And the good news is that with wristbands and rings and things like that, we're actually starting to be able to measure that in pseudo real time. So I've got a feeling that that's going to provide another marker for us to, if we can find a way to actually use it. I think that you're right onto something. Maybe that's your next venture.
I where I've landed in terms of how I might serve in the kind of final phase of my professional life. Although I think for me and probably a lot of my friends and colleagues and peers, retirement is not it's not one day you stop working and then you go sit on a beach or stand on a golf course or whatever it is, get on a cruise and never get off. Um, my brain won't let me do that. I'm a terrier at heart, and so I need to keep at things. But I have officially let my network know that should the right entrepreneurial opportunity or startup opportunity come along, I will certainly consider it. And what I've learned is I know what I won't do again. And team, the people I work with, not the people who work for me, but the people I work with, will be people who challenge me, and a minimum number of people, right? Because I don't want to operate in a vacuum again, because that happened largely as a result of COVID. But I don't work well that way. And so team is paramount. The quality of the team, the quality of the people on the team, the mission is important, right? The science can be questionable, like in terms of early, but the mission, I have to believe in that too. So there's all these more philosophical demands for how I might operate in an entrepreneurial and a startup environment that I'm no longer willing to negotiate. And it saves time when people come to me and say, "What about this?" Not interested. No, thank you.
It's powerful to know exactly what it is you do and don't want. Phil has, talked a little about, shared that with our BrainWise friends as a part of a transition that I was also and am still going through is, what are some of the, aspects of the job that you might want to do, or some of the, attributes, there we go, of the job that you might want in the future versus, some of the other things. And I think it's really powerful to know those, which I think is a great segue to another question around closure. What are some practical steps, right? Some of those attributes or things that listeners, our brainwise friends, can take to move through closure with courage and compassion.
Absolutely. I think first and foremost, as C-suiters, as leaders, as founders, it's accepting that not everything we start has to be successful. And so reframing what entrepreneurship can mean, it's reframing our own ability to control, right, something we start, right? Because once it leaves our mouths, it kind of goes out of our control, if you will, once you release it to the world. So it's recognizing that we are a lot less powerful in many ways than we think we are or need to be, right? But sometimes we talk about this. I do a lot of work with women in bio and emerging leadership development. And we talk about a personal board of directors. And what I mean by that is having a handful of people in our lives who will tell us the unvarnished truth from their perspective, right? You always take that with, they're coming from a place of whatever it is, but knowing that if you ask them a direct question, they will give you a direct answer and not spare your feelings and not blow smoke up your tail. That's an incredibly valuable relationship dynamic. So there's that. I think a lot of folks, and I actually had a conversation this morning with somebody who is a leader of a startup, and she really wants to be done. But one of the investors just keeps putting more money in, and he's promising a slug of new money. And she looked at me and she goes, "I don't care. I want to be done." So again, this idea of if everything in your internal dialogue is saying, "I don't want to do this anymore," even if it was easier, i.e., funded, that's powerful. But then it's about giving ourselves permission to be done and saying, "I appreciate you want that from me, or you want me to do that for you. Find another person," right? I can make great recommendations, but we have to be okay with choosing our own well being in leadership roles to say, "I can't give any more than I have." And it still hasn't gotten me to a place where I'm comfortable. And it's never going, unless you get fired, choosing to leave is always a choice. And it's not an easy one. But it gets easier if you're choosing your own well being over the life of some other non human thing. And that's where I got to. So, accepting that the choice is hard. Talk to a handful of people you trust. Don't go seeking consensus. You'll never get it. But once you've made the decision, see how it feels in your body. And if your body says, thank you, and you get a good night's sleep for the first time in 9 months, go with that, right?
I remember working with a guy who was very senior investment banker on Wall Street. And he said, whenever we make an investment, we do two other things as well. Where we turn around and say, and if it ever reaches this in the way going up, that's when we're going to sell. And if ever reaches this on the way down, that's when we're going to sell. So putting guardrails around it. Is there any way you could have predicted your own personal guardrails?
Gosh, that's a great question. Probably. When we coach people around startup and entrepreneurship, and even just building a commercialization strategy for a new asset in a drug company, it's where are you trying to get to? What is the exit plan, right? Start with the end in mind and reverse engineer all the way back. That's a powerful appreciation and a powerful exercise because, again, it's about clarity, and all minds want clarity and certainty. But at least clarity, right? They'll settle for clarity. So guardrails, yeah. As I told myself, I wanted to get the program to a point where we had at least a hint of clinical proof. And in the drug development world, clinical trial world, that's phase 2A, phase 1B, phase 2A, and certainly in Alzheimer's. Before things get wildly long and expensive in clinical trial land. And my thought was, I knew the only way this would work is that we had a pharma partner with deep pockets who said, we'll pick this up now, or we'll co-develop this with you with an option to buy, when we've met a scientific or a clinical milestone. So that was always the end, because it's less interesting to me to commercialize and sell drugs and promote and market. That's not my bag. But in terms of on the other side of, if things don't go forward and they start to go backwards, a lot of times it's run out of money, right? That's an easy guardrail, an easy ending point. But the thing that makes this whole bit messy is in startup, and certainly in biotech startup, you often work, and I did this for a long time, you work for stock. You work at risk is the phrase, meaning you don't get paid until there is some level of success. And so you get used to living like you're a PhD student, right? And you have no means. Um, and that creates neural pathways in your mind that, oh gosh, just getting paid a little would be better than this. But I can live with this, right? My spouse is working, my partner's working, or I'm living off my savings, all these things. And so it can get a little murky as to where the bottom is when you're already working for free. Um, so I think there is great wisdom. If you can't put a number on things, you can at least look at the data and say, if we haven't hit this milestone defined as something truly measurable within the first 18 months or some degree, some timeline, that's probably a better way to play with it, is set a timeline, right? If we haven't done a thing by X amount of months, the likelihood of it happening gets less and less and less. But whether or not that's the right answer is less important as to there being thought given to it, right? Because that's, again, considering the end at the beginning and allowing yourself a framework in which to play and operate, that there are safety nets, if only emotional safety nets, right? Psychic safety nets.
I think it's 100% when you said whether it's the right answer or if it's really just the exercise of going through the thought of putting together the guardrails, I think is really powerful. And I'd like to maybe kind of close us out with a final question, which is taking the practical advice or the guardrails discussion and maybe through a different lens, which is how can leaders support their team members who are struggling with closure, especially when the transition is not their choice?
Yeah, it's a very powerful question, and it's getting ready to happen a lot as the technology that we've unleashed starts to disrupt, right? Hence my point about the recent Ezra Klein interview with the leaders of Anthropic and his predictions for who's going to be outed from the workforce first. Preparing for change, because change is inevitable, certainly is when you think about developing your your junior staff, your emerging leaders, your next gen leaders, helping them be well rounded, right? I think that's an important skill set. Always, whether or not, failure's on the horizon or not, it's taking time to consider self-care plans, right? Self-care in the face of major changes, right? Job loss is one of those 5 major stresses. So, making sure people have a support system, right? Just human to human, that's important, right? Who can you talk to as you process this? Who's going to make sure when things really get bad that you feed yourself, that you get out of bed every day and you don't get, swallowed up by a situational depression because that is common. So making sure that people are safe and cared for. And then it's reframing the opportunity of this may be ending, but let's imagine what's possible in a new beginning. And how could we help you prepare for the next role you have in this space? Who can I connect you to? Again, the mission may change, but the mission of serving each other and the mission of serving the greater good never changes. So, as leaders and as humans, really helping folks feel the feels, right? You can't tell them not to feel badly. That's not fair or even uh, practical. But allowing them not to get stuck in those feelings, even while they're processing them, and giving them bits and pieces of, ooh, imagine if, right? What could be, and planting forward seeds to help people have something to work towards as Rome is burning, right? I think that's powerful and important. And I know I have a lot of really wonderful people in my life that I've worked with who've done that for me and for the people that have worked for them. So I know it's done as a practice. Um, and I think it's still one of the best practices, which is helping people transition.
Yeah, I think it's really powerful. I mean, we talk a lot about empathy and really, what you described, big portion of it is empathy, acknowledging the experiences that have them feeling a certain way and allowing them to experience it in the way that makes sense to them. But then ultimately, and I just, did something you're not supposed to do, which is use a transition word after empathy. You ultimately are at some point helping them be able to navigate to what could be, after acknowledging their experiences. So I truly think it's powerful to be able to do that. And, we actually did a podcast episode here recently on empathy and specifically how it's not, a lot of times there's this misconception that empathy is gendered and that, women are, or men in particular are unable to or less likely to demonstrate empathy. When what we really kind of decoded is that ultimately it's probably more societal than it is, neurological or at the fundamental core of who we are as human beings. So, I think this has been a really powerful discussion, and I'd love to give both you and Phil the opportunity to kind of summarize our conversation today and your thoughts. So, maybe Pepper, we can start with you, and then Phil, hop over to you to get you any final thoughts that you might have.
I think having had plenty of time to process this all happened last year, has allowed me to seem a little more put together about it now in retrospect. If we'd had this meeting 6 months ago, I don't know if I would have been nearly as articulate or balanced about it all. And yet I'm so grateful for the opportunity to speak with you both and serve the audience, to help people recognize that, big things come with big bumps. And it doesn't mean we shouldn't try, and it doesn't mean we're not going to make similar mistakes. I think the greater mistake is not risking ourselves, not risking and daring to to live greatly. I love that old speech from Roosevelt, daring greatly, and the whole thing about the man in the arena or the person in the arena, because that's what has moved civilization forward. And even now, when things are as messy as I've ever known them to be as an American citizen, good things are still happening. And yet, courage and compassion and empathy and civility, all these things that in my world soothe my system, demand patience from my brain and my body. And yet I know that's how we move forward, right? We make mistakes, we forgive ourselves, we forgive each other, we try to learn, whether it's founding a drug company or just having civil discourse for moving our country forward. But I hope truly that whatever I've offered today on this podcast helps people not shrink from big opportunities, however they're couched, if they're wrapped in funny wrapping paper or, bad things happen the minute you open the box. It's still more interesting to live a life of courage than the alternative. And I'm so blessed that I've had the wherewithal and the support to do pretty gnarly things and live to tell the tale.
So I'm going to take an opportunity to wrap up and make a couple of points. One is, what's come through very clearly is you've taken on some big challenges and you're encouraging other people, hey, don't shrink back, go for it. And I think the very fact that we're having this conversation now and you survived, you had a few bumps on the way, but you're still here, is a good demonstration to other people that regardless of what you do, you're going to survive. And I think the other thing is sort of, in a way, this sort of puts a bow around this discussion, is that actually I met Pepper through Peter Johnson many, many years ago. And if you listen to, and we've just several months ago, we had Peter on here. And one of the things he talks about is the need to take risk. And I think you're basically giving us the same message. So thank you for being here, and thank you for opening up and probably expressing some things that maybe you didn't know you were going to express.
Well, it has been an absolute pleasure to spend this time with you both. And yeah, if I'm in the company with Dr. Pete, that's a pretty esteemed group.
It is. Well, thank you so much for joining. I mean, truly, this conversation, Pepper, has been just very enlightening and, I think therapeutic for me. And I know for others as they've listened to your experience. So thank you for allowing us to learn from you and through you. And, hopefully I think we have plans. Actually, I know we do. I don't know why I'm saying but to have you on for a second episode here in the very near future. So we're very much looking forward to it. And thank you for blessing us with your time. It truly has been powerful. So, as always, to our BrainWise friends, if you enjoyed today's conversation, rate and review us wherever it is you get your podcast. Like, comment, share, and subscribe on all of our social media platforms so we can continue to grow this really amazing BrainWise community. And until next time, stay curious, stay compassionate, and always stay
Hey,
BrainWise.
BrainWise.